What's going on, gang? And welcome back to another episode of 𝙎𝘾𝘼𝙍𝙈. I'm Mike Murphy, and today I'm joined by Sean Neer, and we're sitting down with the homie, Garrett of Pine Printshop. And really looking forward to this episode. If you've been buying t-shirts from us, or if you've ever bought a t-shirt from Traction, it's been printed by Garrett. So we're really excited to sit down with you today, man. Thanks for coming up and hanging out.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah,
it's an honor.
It really is a treat to sit down with you. Every time me and Sean have the opportunity to sit down and just share words with you, we leave just feeling so motivated and excited all the time. So yeah, I'm really excited for this episode.
Well, likewise. I appreciate you guys giving me the time. And like I said, I feel like with all the interesting people you've had on the podcast, to invite your screen printer on is...
Well, it's funny, when
Are you guys running out of guests?
Oh no.
From the conception, we were we need Garrett on this. Your energy is contagious, and what you've done, talking about, getting a new location, everything, it inspires us. And I don't know, from the start, we were we need Garrett. So we're stoked we're here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so for the people who are listening who don't know who you are, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Yeah.
Who is Garrett?
Who is Garrett?
I love that everybody, when we ask that question, everybody's like, oh man, that's a loaded question.
Dude, that's heavy.
Is that goosebumps on your arm?
Yeah, that's from a business context, my name is Garrett. I own and operate Pine Printshop in Fort Collins. I have been running a business for the better part of a decade. Wow. So 2000, officially since 2014. I tell people kind of on and off since 2012. But as I've gotten, when you ask who is Garrett, I'm like, well, don't start with your business. But here I am starting with my business.
Dude.
I own and operate Pine Printshop. We're a screen printing and embroidery company based out of Fort Collins, and obviously the Traction merch partner, which is awesome.
Yep.
Been doing that for 2000 since 2014.
Damn.
I kind of got my start. I got my start in screen printing. So I grew up in Trinidad.
Okay.
Which
that's crazy. I did not know that.
Yeah. So I grew up in Trinidad, Trinidad, Colorado. Yeah, other people are like, oh, Trinidad and Tobago.
So the reason I ask, I grew up in Northern California, and there was Trinidad right above me.
Oh, there's a Trinidad, California.
Oh yeah, way northern.
What was the reputation?
Growing weed.
Well, that's what Trinidad, Colorado is known for now.
Yeah. Perfect.
When I was growing up, Trinidad, Colorado was the transsexual capital of the world, as far as I know.
Yeah. So I remember that reputation growing up as well. Yeah, that's kind of crazy to think about.
When you mentioned Trinidad, there was all kinds of... Now these jokes would not fly. Yeah. But at the time, it was have you always been a man?
Yeah. Damn.
Which is... so I grew up in Trinidad, which is... If you live in Colorado and you drive south on I-25, Trinidad is the last thing before New Mexico. So it's a town of 8,000 people. It's kind of been one of those boom and bust towns where at one point it was booming with coal, and then natural gas, and most recently cannabis. But it's always been kind of up and down and cyclical economy.
That's a crazy town too, because when you roll through the downtown, there's an incredible skate park there that I love to ride.
Yeah.
And when you drive through that downtown, some of those buildings are so incredible. They're so beautiful, but like you've said, it's gone through so many swings where it's most of the buildings are kind of just in a dilapidated state because there's nothing there. And that was 5 years ago talking about that. And now I was just there end of last year, and some of those buildings are coming back, and it's super cute boutique-y restaurants in there. I'm like, what is going on? So
totally,
that's kind of cool.
It is really cool. And growing up in a small town. So my grandparents had moved from Denver down to Los Animas County in the 60s, and had some acreage outside of town. And my mom grew up there, and my parents, when my brother's 2 years older than me. When my brother was born, they were living in Southern California, and we're kind of this is probably not the place we want to raise a family. So they moved to Trinidad, and my dad is an insanely talented, just crafts person. At the time, he was making custom cabinets out in Southern California, and my mom is also super creative, and the two of them together are kind of this entrepreneurial power couple. And so in the early 90s, they moved to Trinidad and kind of saw this the cyclical economic boom and bust thing, and kind of the toll it took on people who live there. And for them, they kind of felt like, how can we be a part of a solution to provide sustainable jobs for people? How can we like invest in this community? And so they started a business, taking what each of them knew. My dad, carpentry and woodworking, and my mom, she had been working for Hallmark designing greeting cards.
Wow.
So they kind of combined those two, and in the early 90s, they started this this company called Danielson Designs, making picture frames in Southern Colorado. And so, I mean, it started with like, this is the reason I go so deep into this is like, only with time I can look back on their story and be like, and see the parallel with my own.
For sure.
Because like they started in on my grandparents' property in an extra outbuilding, having people like hand assembling and then hand painting these picture frames. And then, you know, they're going to trade shows in Atlanta. I'm like a newborn baby in a box of styrofoam peanuts in like at a trade show, and they're selling these things. And so like, I grew up in that context of like, my parents were entrepreneurs, they were small business owners. And to me, you know, when you're a kid, like normal is whatever you grow up with, 100%. Right? And so to me, growing up in that context, it was like, I didn't know any different. And it was not only possible to start your own business and be a successful entrepreneur, but like, I think almost on a subconscious level, it was like, oh, well, this is what we do.
Yeah. That's like the only option, right?
Yeah. Right. Because all through growing up, my parents, you know, they sold that business when I was 25. So all growing up, that was what they did. I didn't have, obviously I knew of other people doing other things, but like, I saw that as this is not only possible, but this is normal.
Was your first job working for them?
Yeah. So when I was in, you know, they grew this thing over time, and at some point they had, you know, a 35,000 square foot manufacturing facility, and
dang,
they would bring in pallets and pallets of like 3/4 inch MDF. And then they'd throw it on. They had 2 big old automated CNC machines. So that's why it's fun to see your guys' espresso stuff. Because like, I've also seen that same technology cutting out signs and picture frames and stuff.
Oh, that's so cool.
A full paint line. And then it would go into for decoration. And at some point, this would have been like mid 2000s. These signs and frames would come off the paint line and they would get screen printed. And so I first was introduced to screen printing in the context of working for my parents as they're screen printing signs and picture frames and that kind of thing. And when they kind of outgrew screen printing as a decoration method, they eventually moved into digital printing.
Sure.
And they had all the screen printing equipment. So at the time, I'm like 14, 15, and my dad gave me a 1-station, 1-color screen printing press. And I took that. I had always been interested in I guess aesthetics, graphic design.
And do you think that was from like your mom, since she was like designing like cards and stuff like that?
Had to be,
like,
dude.
Because like, you know, I have friends that have grown up in design focused households, and like they end up being like incredible designers or art directors or whatever. And like, you know, most people don't just like fall into that world without having some influence like in their childhood.
Totally. And like, we grew up on 40 acres in rural Southern Colorado where like, I mean, until I was 7, we didn't have a flushing toilet. Like,
no way.
We were shitting in sawdust.
Wow.
Like we had a composting toilet, and like their business was, you know, 200 yards away from, we lived in a remodeled barn on my grandparents' property. And then the business was, you know, stone's throw down the road. And so, I mean, dude, we grew up, again, like when you're that age, you don't really know, you don't understand. Well, most people don't grow up like this. You know?
People poop in water.
Most people poop in perfectly good water.
Yeah.
But
damn, that's crazy.
Looking back now, I'm like, wow, that was like, it's like a really unconventional way to grow up. And so for my siblings and I, like, my parents, we never had video games growing up. My parents were, at the time, you know, growing up, I like spited my parents for living in a small town and like not letting me have an Xbox.
Yeah, because I'm sure when you're going to school and you're talking to all your friends, right? And like, they're talking about pooping in water and playing their Xboxes. You're just like, dude, that sounds nice. Like I poop in sawdust and I play with colored pencils. That's what I get to do. You know, like that's a crazy perspective to have, dude.
Totally. And again, like in only as I've gotten older and can see that in perspective, am I like grateful for it? You know what I mean? Because I think it did, like, from a young age, we weren't, or it helped me think unconventionally.
Yep.
Or like introduce me to a different way of thinking. We weren't like, we didn't have that easy out of turning on the TV or like playing video games. We were always left up to like, get creative, make your own fun, get outside. And so again, like in retrospect, I'm really thankful for that. I think like obviously that had a huge influence on me and who I've become from a young age. I always tell people like we never had TV until 9/11. Like,
really?
Yeah, man. I remember like the morning of 9/11, we didn't have a television in our house at the time. And so, like, I think we found out something was going on because my parents had, like, NPR on in the morning or something on the radio. Wow. And so I grew up, like, small town, pretty sheltered kid. And like, growing up in that context, it was, like, make your own fun, use your imagination. I mean, dude, we'd play for hours in the woods with.
I was about to say, what were you doing? Obviously, no Xbox, no nothing. What are you doing as a kid in Trinidad?
A lot of drawing, like a lot of. The other cool thing is like we were in this context where we're living on 40 acres. So you can run around in the woods building forts,
just full on lawlessness.
Climbing
trees, dude.
Yeah.
Like full. I mean, as we got older, it evolved into other things. Like I really got sucked into paintball. And so like it started with, because when we're kids, it's like we're running around in the woods, sticks become guns. And like as we got older, early teenage years, my parents finally let me get a paintball gun. Around that time, all my buddies are getting paintball guns. And then we're running around in the woods shooting each other. And so that kind of became like an obsession for me to the point where like my first business was paintball related. So I'm like, as a teenager, at that point we had internet. And so like, my parents would be like, you can have an hour of internet a day.
Was this dial up at the time, I would assume?
At first it was. And it's like, so we had like rationed internet time. And like as a young teenager, I'm using all my rationed internet time to be online in these paintball forums, like hustling gear and selling stuff.
That's
and
so sick.
It's so weird, dude. Like, I mean, it's this weird subculture that I kind of got sucked into where, again, and there's probably some of this in the BMX and mountain bike world too, where in paintball, there was basically a lot of kids with too much disposable income. And so there was this fabric called venomware. It was the specific print, like the specific pattern that had gone out of production in the late 80s. In paintball's early days, it was the thing.
It's like the Gucci of paintball.
Exactly, bro. And so as like an 8th grader, I'm going online in these forums, finding these old venomware jumpsuits, and then cutting them up into headbands and reselling them on the forums.
No way.
So like sewing terry cloth on the back. There was actually, I bought like bootleg Gucci and Louis Vuitton patterns and made those into headbands and like hired my sister to be my seamstress and is like,
dang.
So dude, it's so weird because like in 8th grade, I remember like at its peak around 2008, right before the financial crisis.
You're doing this in middle school.
Yeah, like 8th grade, 9th grade, around there. So I'm like, but dude, it's funny because like I'm selling these headbands for up to like $100 a piece.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
For your parents, like, what the hell is going on?
Oh, they were just kind of rolled their eyes.
This kid must be selling drugs. How does he have all these $100 bills?
Because, dude, like all that money would just be rolled right back into like another paintball gun.
Yeah, for
You know
sure.
what I mean? It's not like I was doing anything crazy with the money other than like buying more paintball stuff.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like, that was another early example of, I don't know, I've always been kind of geared towards hustling and making stuff happen and like, and also just like, I guess to some degree, there's some kind of mystery about it to me of like, I don't really know why I am the way that I am, but I can look back and look at things like that. And I'm like, I guess I've always kind of been this way.
Yeah.
I haven't changed much.
Yeah. I'm like, how strange.
It all stems back to not having that Xbox. You're like, dude, I got to do something to be able to buy this Xbox.
100%,
If
man.
my parents won't buy it, I'm going to buy my own.
All right, but before we move on from Trinidad, I got to know what was the most reckless thing you did on those 40 acres? Because I grew up on like kind of the same thing, backwoods, Northern California vibe, which I feel like is pretty close. Like looking back, like what is the most reckless thing that happened?
Oh man, dude, we had two of my best buddies growing up. Well, two thoughts. Two of my best buddies growing up were twin brothers, and they were my age, and like we had like all the same interests. Like we all wanted to join the military. We were all into paintball. We all, you know, we lived real close to one another, and we were always running around the woods shooting each other. And when we're in like early high school, their parents bought some acreage east of town, some like farmland, and they got ATVs. And I can remember one time my buddy Rye was like by far the most reckless of all of us. We're on the ATVs driving around these fields, and there's just a cow pond, you know, probably like good 2-3 feet of water. And he's like, I think I got this.
Pond skim.
Oh no.
Dude, just full on guns it straight into the pond.
Immediately sinks, huh?
Dead stop in the middle, and his brother and I are on the other ATV, just like, you idiot. So then it's like an hour and a half of with a winch and like trying to push this thing out and trying to make sure his dad doesn't find out. Some of the most, honestly, dude, I think another story that comes to mind is like, as a small town kid, like there wasn't that much to do. So like in late high school, man, we got into like, I worked at a golf course, and a lot of my buddies that I worked with at the golf course were just like same situation, small town kids, kind of mischievous, like, and bored more than anything, just bored. So we had this phase where like, we really like pranking. That's pretty like,
Yeah, that's pretty
for
normal.
high school kids.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
we didn't drink that much. Like we were just bored small town kids. And like we're driving around late one night around downtown Trinidad and, ding dong ditching people, things of that nature. And there's this guy walking down the sidewalk, and my buddy Jared is driving the car, and he slows down real slow. And I lean out the window and yell to this guy. I'm like, hey, you dropped something. And like the context of the prank is like, if they turn around and look for something that they didn't actually drop, it's like the funniest thing in the world. So I'm like, hey, you dropped something. And this guy pulls a Glock 19 out of his pants, goes, what, motherfucker? And we're like, oh.
No way.
It was not. We're like, let's go home.
Yeah. No more pranks after that.
I just grew up a couple of years.
Yeah, it was like that kind of snapped us out of it of like, okay, time to grow up.
That doesn't surprise me though, like growing up in Trinidad, because there's some pretty gnarly shit that goes on along that I-25 corridor. Like, a lot of pretty gnarly drugs get passed along there. So you just pulled up on the wrong dude walking down the street, dude.
Stupid.
So talking about high school years, before we started this podcast, we asked you, did you have a MySpace in high school?
I definitely had a MySpace. We were actually talking about this at the shop this week. And we were like, I wonder if somewhere there's an archive of old MySpace profiles.
Ooh, I bet there is.
I'm sure if I could pull up my MySpace now, it'd be so cringy. Dude.
I know. I was about to say, it's got to be so bad.
It's so bad. But I also, can you guys remember who... I think one of the most toxic things about MySpace, this was before like social media was so toxic, right?
Yeah.
But I'm like, the top 8.
Oh, dude. Well, then they had to expand it because then you could like go like top like 32
Top 24
or something like that.
There's
Like,
top 32.
I think that's what it was before like MySpace went away. But I think it was because people were getting so upset. Like like that one person that was the number 1 on your top 8.
Yeah.
Like that was a prestigious spot to be in.
Oh,
like,
bro.
I remember like I had all my friends in there and my girlfriend wasn't
It
top
was-
number 1 and she would be so
It wasn't
pissed.
Tom.
Nah, dude.
Tom was my
Was
number
Tom
1.
your number 1
Yeah.
forever?
Well, the reason we're on this,
You would.
most important thing, what was your MySpace song that comes to mind?
Oh, man. Probably, I mean, at that point,
It's got to be Nickelback.
Oh no.
no, probably like Bayside or something.
Shout out Bayside.
Shout out Bayside. That's a great question, man. I wish I could pull that up. Like probably Bayside and then like later years, Big L.
Hell yeah.
You
That's
know,
sick.
something
The
of
art
that.
of storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's sick.
What
Well,
was yours? I'm curious.
Lucero, like
Nice.
alt country. Yeah.
Alt country.
How would you?
Yeah, it's like
describe-
all country.
Yeah, like a rock country.
It's
Yeah.
just like Lucero was so popular in BMX. Like
Yeah.
you've heard Lucero for sure.
Oh
but
yeah. What with all the edits were Lucero?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Like, there was
yeah.
this like BMX series that was like a whole full like video, like big DVD sets, VHS sets called Props, and there was just like Lucero would it's every single one of those. And like there'd be like Lucero shows that they would be at like every BMX competition.
Wow. So
you
it's
know?
like their niche.
Yeah.
What was yours?
I don't know, probably some like hood rat rap music, like some Rick
With your Louis
Ross.
Vuitton background.
Oh yeah, Louis Vuitton background. I was super into Burberry at that time. but-
Yeah.
yeah. Well, shout out to James Stocco for that question because
Yeah.
he's not here to ask it today. But
Dude, I remember in MySpace, like I could really nerd out again, like
Dude.
going back to aesthetics. I remember like learning HTML to trick out my MySpace page.
yep, that's the only reason I know how to build websites is like because of
Shout out to Tom.
yeah. Shout out to Tom. He really like set us up good. You know,
Yeah.
like it's kind of crazy to think about that era of life. Like kids these days will just never get to experience that. Like how free the internet was at that point in time. You know. And like, think about how cool Facebook would be if you could have a song on there. I mean, come on, dude.
Right?
Wait, I don't know if we told you, but Tom's our next guest on
Tom
Scared
from
of Normal.
MySpace?
Yeah.
Man, I wonder where he's at. I
Dude,
wonder
I
if
saw-
he's living normal.
I
yet.
saw on Twitter, this was like a year or so ago, somebody was just like, imagine how sad your life would be if you were Tom now, knowing your like company just like went to shit. And he like tweeted back and he was like, I live on an island now and I'm worth $500 million. Who's sad now? Or something, it was something like that. And I was just like, yeah,
Shout out to Tom.
everybody's
Tom.
first friend. Tom just defriended that guy.
Oh my god.
But yeah, kind of funny, man. What an era of life that was. So you go from doing hood rat shit with your friends in Trinidad.
Yeah.
When do you move out of Trinidad? How long
So
after?
yeah, I was by the time I finished high school, I was so ready to get out of there. I mean, I tried to convince my parents to let me graduate early and leave early. So again, like in retrospect, I'm like, I didn't love growing up in a small town. It's only in retrospect that I'm like, oh, I think that was like really formative for me in a good way.
Yep.
But I left Trinidad when I graduated high school. I went to business school at Baylor.
Is that
down
in Waco?
In Waco, Texas. So like now Waco is known as the headquarters of Fixer Upper.
Oh yeah. Magnolia. What is that place called?
Yeah, Magnolia. Magnolia is like their brand. I mean,
Yeah.
dude, it is
They're
insane.
huge now, dude.
It's insane.
They're in every Target store around the country.
They've done very well for themselves.
Yeah.
I when I moved there, so that's like 2010. Waco was known for the Branch Davidian massacre.
Oh, yeah.
The David Koresh thing, and I never really thought I'd end up in Texas, much less at Baylor. Kind of a weird story, but I did 3.5 years of business school there. Near the end of my time there, like my last year there, I had in between like summers in college, I was coming back to Colorado, and my brother was living in Fort Collins. I had cousins in Fort Collins, so I was coming back and living in Fort Collins throughout the summers. And a buddy and I, over one summer, we wanted to start a clothing company. And so we printed a run of shirts and called it Pine Brand, and did threw up the website, started selling t-shirts, and when I moved back to Texas, I think I studied abroad for a semester in between that and moving back to Texas. But I bought a single, like a little garage screen print setup. And so my last year at Baylor, I was printing shirts out of a buddy's garage and then working at a big screen print shop. So I was like one of 2 manual printers in this big, I mean, it was like a proper sweatshop.
Yeah.
You know, like 8 automatic machines just running thousands and thousands of units. And so I was like one of two manual printers. And in that context, I really learned, I saw that side of the business. You know, up until that point, it had all been like DIY, in my parents' barn or in a buddy's garage, just figuring it out myself, YouTubing and that kind of thing. And I wonder how legit people are doing this. So I got this job working in this print shop, and like this little like 4-foot Latina woman named Maria, she had to stand on a wooden box to reach her press, to like operate her press. She and I were the 2 manual printers in this big contract shop, and she taught me in the span of a year, basically re-taught me how to print. So that was a super cool experience for me to kind of get humbled a little bit. I was taking my resume around to like all these different print shops in Waco and being like, hey, I'm looking for a job. I'm printing out of my garage.
I sold 30 t-shirts. Give me a job. And they're just like,
and like now being on
the other side.
Being on the other side of that, I'm like, I had to look so dumb.
Yeah.
But they like gave me a shot, and I learned a ton in the span of this year. And so by the time I finished business school, and I'm like 22 years old. I have like $2,000 to my name, and I had been living in Fort Collins for the summers throughout college, and had friends here, and knew it was an awesome place to live. So I'm like, man, I don't want a job. Like, I'm having so much fun doing this t-shirt thing. I really want to be in Fort Collins. I want to figure out a way to make this happen. So I wrote up a business plan and took it to some family members and said like, hey, I really want to do this thing. And I think, in conversations later, they were like, it's not that we didn't have confidence in you, but like, we never really expected that money back.
No way.
That's crazy.
Just in that they were like,
they just did it in like good faith, right?
Yeah, of like, if we get this money back, great. If not, like, I mean, it was an investment in me.
Isn't that the rule of thumb when you invest money into a friend or they ask you for money, like never expect it back?
Yeah.
Yeah,
like,
man.
It makes it easier.
It makes it a lot easier. And I think like, listening to your guys' bootstrapping episode, only in retrospect, I know there's layers to that stuff.
Yep.
And now I really I haven't had to raise capital since that initial investment. But if I were to do it again, like when you borrow money from people, there's a certain weight to that.
Totally.
And
it's almost heavier than, in my opinion, borrowing money from the bank, right?
I agree.
Like, the bank, it's kind of faceless. Like it's the bank.
Right.
But when it's somebody and if it's especially if it's family or if it's a close friend, it's like, you're counting on yourself, like you're personally guaranteeing that to a level, right?
And there's a relationship at stake, or at least in my mind there was a relationship at stake. And so for me, that was a big motivating factor for me of like, I really want to make this thing work, or at the very least, like, I gotta pay this money back.
Yep. And
so I did, like, with interest, I paid that money back. And like, when I was able to do that, I mean, it was 5-6 years later.
Were you making like installments, or did you pay it back as a lump sum?
Paid it back as a lump sum with interest.
Incredible. So were you just like saving that money and like putting it in a separate account, or did you just like?
Not really, man. Like, I didn't have, and again, like being a 22-year-old kid, like I didn't have a grand plan. And like, this is one of those things that it's easy to wonder what if. Like, I kind of have made it up as I went.
Yeah, because like I'm sure you never saw yourself like long term as like a screen printer, right? Like, was that something when you were a kid you weren't like, my end all be all is being a screen printer?
No, not at all, man.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, my story has largely been like just doing the next thing and figuring it out as I go. Like there's not been, I don't know that there's ever been a huge grand vision that I'm working towards, other than for me, it's like, I want to be independent.
Yep.
Like that's kind of what it comes back to for me. Like, I mean, I've almost quit multiple times. And what I always come back to is like, well, what's the alternative? And like, what's most important to me? What fills up my cup is like, I really value being independent. I really value being like in control of my own time, in control of how I allocate my energy on a daily basis. And it's arguable that like sometimes when a business gets to a certain point, like I think you lose some of that agency too.
Yep.
And so another part of my journey is like figuring out how can I regain that, or like how can I get back to the place that in those early days when I first borrowed the money. So I borrowed this money. I bought, $10,000 of screen print equipment off of Craigslist, and then I set up and just like get after it.
Yep.
And I can remember, and I was still working part-time at the time. So for the first 6 months, I'm working part-time, and then nights and every other day and weekends, I'm like printing stuff and, trying to figure out how to make this thing work.
And were you in a garage space still, or was this when you were on like North College in Fort Collins?
No, I was in borrowed space, in like I probably had 300 square feet in a warehouse.
Okay.
And so, I lucked out with being born in the family I was born into. Like, I mean, I come from this family of entrepreneurs that like, it was just, I perceived it as normal of like, this is, this is what we do.
Yeah.
Like,
sometimes we struggle and sometimes we succeed.
And like I through my parents' journey had also seen like, the ups and downs of business to a large degree, but it always was, it was always possible in my mind. I knew that it was like that this is achievable.
Sure.
And whether or not it was true, like, my parents were always like, you can do anything you set your mind to.
Yep.
So I'm like, I grew up believing that like, I can do this. I'm capable of this.
And that's half the battle for most of anything in life, right? Is like, if you believe that you can do it, you're willing it into existence. And that's like a very hard thing for most people to do, because they get so caught up in the day-to-day of life that they're just like, oh man, I'll do that tomorrow. And they're like not believing in the day or their skill set or anything. So when you show up every day and you believe like, oh yeah, this is easy, I can do this.
Yeah.
Even on the hard days, right? Like,
well, I think for me, like even having an example of like, I've seen someone do this.
Yep.
I know that this is possible, and I've seen it firsthand. Like, I don't know that I would be in the same line of, like, if I hadn't seen that in my parents and other people in my family, I probably wouldn't be in the same line of work.
Totally. I think a lot of people see like the what if it doesn't happen. I wasted 3 years of my life, 4 years of my life. Whereas you're seeing like, this is doable. Like you're seeing the positive. I think a lot of people see the negative.
Well, and we're also so built into that like world of fearing failure, right? Like everybody's like, if you start a business, you're gonna fail. Like that's like what most people are told. It's like, if you don't follow this very structured guideline of life, you are gonna fail. You're gonna end up on the streets.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's a hard thing when you're like going out on your own, if you don't have the support system or like the upbringing that you have, like,
right.
Because your parents are saying, you need to go to college, you need to go get that job, and you need to go get that house, and where are your kids at? And
right.
They're not trying to support that dream, and like, you've never gotten to experience that. So you got to see failure firsthand. And like, I kind of want to jump back into, you talk about, there's days that you want to quit, like, and you've said that's changed over time. Like the inspiration used to be like, I need to get this money back, I need to pay this investment back.
Yeah.
What inspires you now to like not give up? Like, where do you reach for when you have those days where like everything's going wrong, or like whatever it is, and you're like, okay, this is why I'm showing up tomorrow?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think over the years, like on several occasions, I've had to kind of like reinvent myself, or like I've tried different things and that didn't work. So it's like, well, I got to try something else. And for the first couple of years, it was like, I'm not going to, like, in my mind, it was about like, I have to pay back this investment, because there's this really important relationship to me at stake. So that was a big motivating factor of like, I can't walk away until this is paid back.
Sure.
And once that's paid back, then that's on the table, and then I can assess if that's the best thing for me. But until then, like that was kind of my non-negotiable. So until then, like I got to figure out what works.
Sure.
And I spent so many of those first years just being reactive, honestly, and like making a lot of stupid decisions, like losing a lot of money, having some wins, some losses, and like, the first year when I quit the part-time work, and I was, I kind of reached this point where I'm like, I'm also in this fortunate position of I'm a 22-year-old kid. I have $2,000 to my name, but I have no debt, and like I have no one relying on me. So I'm in a perfect position to take an immense amount of risk, right? And so with nothing to lose, I'm like, you know what, man? Like I gotta go all in on this. Like I'm like dipping my toe, and I kind of have the safety net of the part-time job. I'm like, I gotta go all in, or it's like the Band-Aid approach. Like let's make this thing work, or let's fail faster if it's not gonna work.
For sure.
I don't want to waste my time like kind of
just jump into the deep end and see if you can swim.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And so, that first year I paid myself $24,000. I was sharing a room with a friend, paying $200 a month in rent, and like just getting by, just like making it work as much as I could with the vision of like, I really want to grow this thing, and this is going to require my time. So I actually found it, but like along the way, for example, the first year, like I didn't know how self-employment taxation worked.
Yep. So
I pay myself $24,000 a year. I'm like I'm right at the poverty line. You know what I mean? Like I'm fine. I'm living I love my life at the time, just living super simply and doing what I want to do. But when I get to the end of the year, I go to file taxes, and my accountant's like, "You owe the government $3,500." And I'm like,
what?
I don't have $3,500. Meanwhile, my buddy who I'm sharing a room with is like, he's a public school teacher, and he literally got a refund check for $3,500.
Oh no.
And I'm like, this seems wrong.
Yeah.
So, I again, man, one of the things when I look back and think, what if, I'm like, I sometimes wish that I had the humility to go maybe work for someone else, or like, get experience in having the humility to go get experience in the real world before like going all in with myself. And it's what a waste of time, right? To wonder what if.
Yeah.
But like, I do think it would have saved me some of those stupid mistakes.
Well, I think there's also a lot of value in that what if question too, though, because like when there are people who come to you who are looking to do something similar to you, you can be like, here's what I would have done differently.
Totally.
I am here today, but here's how I would have expedited this process. So I think there is some value in like looking back in hindsight and seeing like these were the road bumps that like kind of prolonged me getting to this point now,
right.
Like, because I find myself there a lot too, where I'm like, man, if I would have done this, and this,
right,
this would have been a lot more simple. But it's also, it is a what if, because like you could have done that and everything could have gone astray.
Right.
But you just never know.
I think you learn the most from those biggest potholes that you slam into, right?
Yep,
like
totally.
We need to hit those. And I mean, I feel like when everything's going right, you're just kind of flowing with it. And with those potholes, like, what do you think your biggest sacrifice was to date to make, Pine happen, to make your lifestyle happen, you think?
I just turned 30 this year. And so like, I told my wife, Jane, I'm like, I feel like I largely gave my 20s to building this thing.
Yep.
And, so it's time, it's money, like, or lack of money. I kind of look at like different paths. It's interesting to look at friends and family who have taken more conventional paths, and kind of see the different places that we end up in. But I think at the end of the day, man, like your time and energy is your most finite resource, your most valuable and your most finite resource. And so I think the biggest sacrifice that I made was just like allocating time that I'm never going to have back to building this thing. And from where I stand now, I'm like, I don't have regrets. Like, I've learned a ton. It's easy to wonder what if, and ultimately it's a waste of time, but that is time that I won't get back.
Yep.
And so, right now, like the present moment is my entire life. Right. So I think the sacrifice, like, is at this point, I can say the sacrifice is well worth it, but I feel like a lot of my 20s, you know, I didn't have the same flexibility. I had a lot of friends who were like, who got to travel a lot through their 20s and like had less responsibility. You know, at 25, I'm like, I've got payroll and employee and like rent and all these things. Like, I shouldered a lot of responsibility at a young age.
Yep.
And that was a sacrifice, you know, like whether or not it was worth it, I can only, from where I stand right now, I'm like, yeah, like I don't think I would change anything, but there are times when I've been like, oh man, I wish I would have like drawn out that period of like low responsibility and just exploration of the world a little bit longer. Whereas I kind of jumped all in, bro, and I'm like, give me the debt, give me the responsibility, like give it all.
Let's go.
Hey, let's go.
Yeah.
And like, again, like it was formative for me. It's made me who I am today. And I don't necessarily regret it. But it's felt like a heavy sacrifice at times to be like, oh man, when I see friends and family who have taken other paths, I'm like, oh man, I wonder what if.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, you like see like, you know, a friend that's like has a kid that's 4 years old or whatever, and you're like, there's no way I could have done that.
Right.
Like, it's things like that. I feel like when you look at your friends that are in that spot, or your friend that has the $1 million house or whatever it is, with your friend that's going on like these, you know, multi-country trips, and you're just like, man,
right.
you know, you have like almost that like FOMO type feeling. But it's like, I don't know, I think about it a lot too, where it's like people don't have that perspective of what it takes to run a business. Like, if you were to go out and do those things, like things aren't getting done on the home front, right? And so like making that sacrifice today means tomorrow, like you're probably going to get to do some really cool things.
Totally. And like at this point, like Jane and I just got back from 2 weeks in the south of France and Spain, and like the business continued to run without me. So I'm like, that in itself feels huge to me. Yeah. Like, oh wow. Like I feel like some of this vision has finally started to come to fruition.
Yep.
But it definitely hasn't been without a lot of years of like not having that option.
Totally.
Or
well,
like,
we talked about that on that bootstrapping podcast too. It's like those years of sacrifice that you put in basically laid the foundation for the business to stand upon, so you can walk out for 2 weeks, right?
Totally.
And like, but it's hard to like have that perspective of that when you're in the thick of it and your friends are going out and doing fun stuff, and you're just like, man, I have to like do the payroll, or I have to pay the taxes, or you can't go have fun.
100%, man.
Yep.
And I think if I had known, I don't know, again, like if I had known at the beginning, I think that there's like, everyone has this idea of what it is to run a business, myself included. And at the beginning, I can say that like, I didn't, if I had a full idea of what it was actually going to be like, I'm like, I don't know if I would have done it.
For real. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if you knew all that from the jump, it would be too overwhelming and be like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I think it takes some naivete, like a little bit of ignorance for people to take that leap and say, and figure it out. And then once you're in it, it's just like, rather than knowing everything at once, it's just like, I just have to do the next thing.
Totally.
What's the next best thing in
You're
the
just
moment
catching
I
the
can
next
do?
wave, dude.
Totally.
And it's funny that you say that too, because like some of the most successful people that I've ever met have said the same thing, where like, if I would have known what this was going to take from the beginning, I probably wouldn't have done it. But standing where I stand now, I'm very grateful.
Yeah.
So it comes back to that perspective thing. If you understand the weight of what it's going to take to start a business and like maintain and grow a business from the beginning, most great businesses would not exist.
Yeah.
They just simply wouldn't, because that's a heavy burden to bear as somebody who doesn't know anything.
Right.
You know?
I think the other like big risk that you take, a lot of people have ideas for businesses. And I think that one of the big risks you take by actually taking steps towards that is going from an idea to a reality. And when something remains an idea, like it's really it can be whatever you want it to be. Like if it's just a fantasy, right? Of like, and I think there's safety in that and there's comfort in that of like something remaining an idea and conceptual and like, oh, someday I'm gonna make this business and it's gonna be like this, and then we're gonna do this and it'll be so cool when we do this. And it's like the reality of that a lot of the time doesn't add up with your fantasy.
Yep.
And I think there's an inherent risk in like those two not adding up.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people get stuck at like, for a lot of people, it's enough to have the fantasy. And if you take the fantasy from an idea to manifesting something in real life, you run the risk of like, oh, the reality of this is nothing like what I imagined. So I have the saying, like, I give big props to everyone, everywhere, trying to make anything, because it is hard.
It's really hard. I love what you're saying about like turning that idea, like manifesting the idea, because like taking an idea and like then actually executing on it, like respecting the process of that for everybody, like that's huge, dude. Like recognizing that is huge, because you know, how many people do you talk to that like, oh, I have this $1 million idea. It's like, cool, like what's the plan to achieve that? Because we all have beautiful ideas, but then when it comes to actually making that happen, that's a huge difference. And like you said, the fantasy is so beautiful, it's hard to see past that sometimes. And a lot of people, I don't think, have seen the other side of that coin. And it is very easy to like live in that romanticized world of like, oh yeah, this could make a lot of money. It's like, totally, yeah, it could, but there's a million steps before you even make your first dollar.
Yeah, man, I think that's what, and honestly, like I've said, I was born into these circumstances that kind of like chalked me up to do what I'm doing. You know what I mean? Like I was in a position when I first started Pine, like I was in a position with nothing to lose. A ton of people finish college and are shouldered with a ton of debt that really narrows like what those choices are. Like I'm fortunate enough that wasn't really part of my equation. I was like, I don't want to make a decision based solely on money. Like I really want to do something that I'm fired up to do on a day-to-day basis. And at the time that was like building this company, like making prints, and it's evolved over time. But I think, yeah, I guess I don't want it to sound like, I think it's easy for me to say like, do something, take that first move. When it's like, bro, you had everything in your life aligned for you to be in a great position to take that risk. So if I had finished college with like a bunch of student debt, I don't know if I would have taken the same risk, dude. I totally understand that. And I'm just grateful that I was, again, like born into the circumstance that I was, where that wasn't part of my equation. And like that led me down the path that I'm on now.
It's so sick too, though, that you can recognize that, because I know a lot of people who have been born into a certain or a similar situation who have had all the things at their disposal, and they've chosen not to execute on any of that. And they kind of just like merrily go about life and like don't really acknowledge that. And that's a hard thing to acknowledge in of itself. So that's huge, dude. That's really cool.
And I think even bigger, like obviously your parents were entrepreneurs and like showed you this path that, you know, you might not have seen, but the bigger thing is like finding something that you actually love with your heart, because to show up for 4-10 years every day when stuff's breaking down, this and that, like you have to care about it. If you don't, you're going to give up on it. And I think that's the biggest thing for a company that is bootstrapped. Like you have to know deep down in your heart, like I'm not doing this or I'm going to do this because I'm not going to go do X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to work there. I'm not going to work there. I will be poor here because I fucking love it.
You know, smile. Yeah. Well, and I even remember there was a day I came up there to pick up shirts from you guys, and like everything was going wrong. And like, I don't know, it's just cool that like you're at the point in business now where you own the fact that stuff is just going to be fucked up.
Yeah.
Like I've talked about it on one of these podcasts before, but one of my good buddies told me, he's like, the sooner that you can realize in business that something will always be wrong, at least one thing will always be wrong, the easier business gets, because everybody thinks like, oh, dude, once I get there, everything will be easy. Well, you get there and there's 3 more things fucked up.
Right.
And like the more you grow, the more things that are blowing to pieces in front of you, right? Like that's crazy.
I think it's like anything else, man. And a younger cousin of mine also, she started a business, and we were talking earlier this summer, and she's like, I don't know, I'm thinking about going and getting a job. Like, I'm just so tired of the feast and famine cycle. Like, sometimes it's amazing, and other times I'm like, I don't know where my next check is going to come from. And I'm like, I can totally relate to that. And I think that it's like anything else in life that you get the reps in, and with time comes confidence. And the more, I think if you're providing something of value consistently over a long enough period of time, you can be successful at anything.
100%.
But like, it's hard.
Yeah,
it's really hard.
And it's also hard to commit to that, right?
Totally.
And it's hard to commit yourself fully to that. Like me and Sean always relate it back to riding bikes, because like that's the thing that we know best. But it's like, I think about how many times I had to hit the ground before I learned a trick.
Right.
I still hit the ground, and I've done that trick for over a decade.
You're getting too old for that, bro.
I know, dude. My back hurts. But like, really think about that. Like, we've put in the reps, and you still fail sometimes.
Sure. Yeah.
And like, that's another really hard thing to have perspective on, is like, you can be at the top of your game and you're still going to fuck up.
But I think
it's still going to have a hard day.
And I think failing is like one of those things you have to practice at, because like, it is inevitable in life, whether you're learning a trick on a bike or starting a business or even in relationships. Like, failure is an inevitable part of life. And it's something that, I too have been like guilty of having this perspective of like, someday everything will be dialed.
Yep. Yeah.
We'll have it all right. And it's just like, man, dude, I've been doing this long enough to know like that's not a realistic thing to aspire to, nor should it be. Like, kind of like you were saying, the biggest potholes are the biggest opportunities for growth. Is like, if you can be good at failing, if you can learn to accept the inevitability of failure and learn to bounce back from it quicker. Like, again, every time I've failed or every time I've burned out, I've learned something from it and been able to bounce back quicker than the last time. And I think that's part of the game, man. Like, my parents have always said, they're like, the biggest or the most important trait to being an entrepreneur is just grit.
Yep.
Of like that resilience of being able to try stuff, fall on your face and get back up and then try something else without taking it personally, without, I guess, equating your worth to it.
Letting your ego get involved.
Yeah, letting your ego get too involved, or saying like, oh man, this is just who I am. I can't do this. There's something about that. I think there's something, we can learn it through sports. We can learn it through any number of different things. But I think there's something to the human experience of like, failure is inevitable. Yep. And you got to learn how to do it and do it well. And the sooner you learn that, the less stressful your life is going to be.
Well, an understanding without failure, there is no success.
Right.
Like, what highly successful person do you know that hasn't failed more than they've succeeded? But I don't know one.
Yeah.
But nobody tells that story. That's not a fun story to tell. Like, that's why, like, nobody glorifies failure, because like, it's not beautiful.
Yeah.
No.
Like, success is beautiful, money's beautiful, but nobody tells the story of like, dude, I thought my business was on the verge of bankruptcy and I'm sitting in a closet crying and like, how am I going to pay my employees? Nobody tells that story, but everybody tells the story of buying their first $1 million house. Right. Or their first really cool car.
But I think when you really dig down behind the stories of, a lot of the successful entrepreneurs and business people and even athletes that we see, like, anyone who gets to a high level of what they're doing has for sure failed along the way.
Yep.
And has grown from it, made their peace with it, grown from it, and learned to deal with failure. And I think as business people, that's one of the best things. Like, the sooner you learn that early on, and you'll be way better off.
It's like those, bad days make us really appreciate when shit's going right?
Totally.
It's like, how do you know what sunshine feels like if it never rains?
Yep.
And if you don't mind me asking, like, what was your biggest failure coming up? And like, did you learn anything from it? What did you learn? And I don't know, how impactful was it on your business?
Dude, there's been any number of things, like just dumb things where I've lost money. But I think some of the biggest some of the bigger failures in my mind is like when it comes to people and relationships and when the business grew to a point where it wasn't realistic for it to be a one-man show, I started inviting other people in and hiring people. And as a younger, in my early 20s, I'm like, oh, it'd be sick to work with all my friends. And so my friends were my first employees. And like, I consider myself super lucky that I have a bunch of rad friends who were up for that. And we had some amazing times, but I also made a lot of mistakes in that realm. And like just not knowing any better. Again, like I kind of go back to, I didn't have an example of what it was to be a good employer, like, because I hadn't really been an employee for very long. So I didn't have, there was, this is one of the more embarrassing times. Like I hired a friend of mine who was also my roommate. And I hired him and the stoke was really high and we went and did this trade show thinking that like we were going to write thousands of dollars of orders. We didn't write a single order.
Oh no.
And I mean, like it was maybe 4 months after I had hired him, I had to fire him. And we still lived together for the next couple months. And like, I mean, dude, that relationship was burned. So it was stuff like that. Like, I mean, dude, I've done stupid stuff, and lost even up till recently. Like I've made stupid moves and lost $10,000 and that's fine. Like I've kind of made my peace with that of like, I don't know what I don't know and I can forgive myself for that. It's some of the things that like really bum me out are the things that involve or affect people other than myself, where my ignorance or my naivete like put someone else in a shitty position.
Yep.
So, there's been even up until like 2020, there were times where I like was still hiring friends and when things didn't work out, putting friends in worse positions. And I'm like, I see that as that's kind of my biggest failure, I think. In the end, it all worked out. And like a lot of those relationships, Will, who's worked for me for 4 years and is one of my best friends, his last day was just last week. And like, I mean, he was a huge part of getting Pine to what it is today. And he and I like navigated some really hard conversations at times of like,
when you guys went through one of the toughest times in business together too,
100%.
Like the last
dude.
2 years were wild, and it's cool that you had him there with you.
And there's no one that I would have rather had by my side to get through that crazy, like the shock from COVID and 2021. And so it was good in so many ways. And I think that like, there's something to be said for working with people who you have a deeper relationship with than just a working relationship. But it also just complicates stuff, man. Like when someone wants to like when I'm the person green lighting or red lighting someone's vacation, like
that's hard.
It's so layered. And I think that I was so fortunate to have friends who were gracious to me over the years. And like, there was a lot of forgiveness involved because I made a lot of mistakes, and have grown from it. And now I'm kind of, now as I've employed more and more people, I'm like, finally a couple of years ago, I'm like, okay, we need an employee handbook. Like we need a set of policies because I can't, otherwise, it's like if I'm just the arbiter of the rules, if all the rules are in my mind,
how can anybody abide by that?
Exactly. So I've learned, man, like, again, it's just been one step at a time, like doing the next thing and figuring out like, and a lot of the time it's only by falling on my face and screwing things up and saying, man, this feels so bad. I want to make sure this never happens again.
Well, I think it's cool like that you can openly talk about that, and you talk about like some of the relationships that have been burned and mended. Like that doesn't happen often because most people let the ego get in the way and they're just like, I don't fuck up.
Yeah.
And it's cool that you can like say like, yeah, I made a mistake and I can own that mistake. Like, I don't think a lot of people can do that. So props to you for that. That's really cool. Like one of the questions I was going to ask is just like, you do have a killer team every time I come into the shop, and like, you can tell that you're an incredible leader. Like, where do you think you learned that leadership skill from, since you've never like worked that 9 to 5 in reality, you know? Like, do you think that was from growing up in the entrepreneurial household, or do you think it was just trial and error?
I think that a lot of it has been through through failure, through humiliation of like making poor decisions as a leader. And again, like coming back to that place of like, okay, what went wrong here? Because I feel horrible. I put someone in a really crappy position and I failed as a leader. So how can I move on from here? And when the business kind of took a turn, it's only been in the last couple of years that I've been like, okay, my main focus should be, how can I be a good employer? How can I be a good manager? And for a long time, I got by with the excuse of like, I'm just not a good manager. Like, it's just not in my skill set. And I think that's, if you're gonna own a business and you're gonna employ people, like management and leadership are learnable skills. There's plenty of books and podcasts and gurus out there about both of those things. And so very few people, I think, are like natural managers, natural leaders, born that way. So when I kind of changed my perspective, it's definitely not my, for a long time, it was like my business, my way, that's it. And that's not a great way to lead people. That's not a great way to manage. And you're going to burn a lot of bridges, and you're going to have a really hard time building a team with a mentality like that. So when I kind of made that mental shift of like, wow, well, as I bring more, if I'm going to take on the responsibility of having employees, my job is less about being the best designer or screen printer I can be. My job should be like, how do I be the best leader? How do I be the best manager? How do I be the best employer that I can be? Because this is way beyond me now. So my job needs to be, how do I support these guys to continue operating this business? So yeah, man, I reading books, listening to podcasts, and like just humbly asking other people, like people that I look up to. My dad has always been a great resource. Like whenever I've been in like HR pinches, I'm like, my dad's my first call of like, you're not going to believe this.
Yeah.
And like, he's seen it all. He's dealt with a lot of that stuff. So again, I'm so fortunate to have been born into a circumstance where like I have those resources to lean on.
Yep.
And people to bounce stuff off of, people to try and emulate.
That stuff's infinitely valuable, right? Like that's the hardest part, I think, of starting a business, is having those types of resources. And like I say it all the time, it's like, just ask people questions, because a lot of people, like, if they don't have the resources like you have at your disposal, like if you walk into a business and you actually care, like if somebody came in and like, hey, I'm trying to start a print shop, like, you're probably going to be pretty open if they're pretty genuine to you, right?
Totally.
Like, and I think there's a lot of value in that. It's just going in and asking questions, and like, people are pretty collaborative when it comes to business, and like we want to see other people succeed. And yeah, just
I agree, man.
Asking questions.
I agree. And I over the years, I've always found, especially in my industry, I've always found people in my industry to be way more collaborative than competitive. And so like, I think if you do, everyone loves to talk about what it is they do. And so if you can humble yourself and to go and ask someone in your industry or someone you want to be like, hey, how'd you get here? Can I buy you a beer? Can I buy you a cup of coffee? Like, I've done that on multiple occasions, and it's never has someone been like, nah, dude,
yeah,
piss off. Like there's another print shop in Fort Collins, Go West.
And they're huge,
They're
right?
huge. They do all the breweries and that kind of thing. And early on, I, reached out to them and was like, hey, would love to, shake hands, have a beer together. And, we just went over there, had beers with the dudes, talked shop and kind of got to know each other. And then they started referring me work. So like when they couldn't take stuff on, they're like, call Garrett, he'll take good care of you.
That's so cool.
And so like that potentially competitive relationship was transformed into a collaborative relationship where like they know they have someone solid to refer excess work to. And all of a sudden I've got like a new stream of work coming in.
Sure.
So I think a lot of it is, especially in those, I mean, always like starting your own business will, if nothing else, dude, it will humble you, and you'll realize real quickly, like, I don't know what I don't know. There's so much that I don't know. And there's a certain extent, it's like fake it till you make it.
Yep.
I'm a big believer in that, but I'm also a big believer in humility and like, not being so prideful of assuming you know the best way to do everything, because chances are there's at least a handful of people, probably 36 handfuls of people who have done what it is you're trying to do and would be happy to talk to you about it.
Yep.
And
they're gonna fast track your trail of success too, because they're gonna say, don't do it the way you're thinking of doing it, because that's wrong. We thought it was right when we tried.
Right.
It's like, it is funny when you think about it as a business growing. It's like so many people have failed the way you're about to fail if you think you know the best way to do it. Like,
totally.
I love the way you say it. It's like you're recognizing that there are things that you don't know. You don't know what you don't know, and you're always trying to close that gap as you're growing your business. And like as you're closing it, it's still getting bigger. Like you're never going to close that gap entirely. So being aware of that's very key, I think.
Totally.
Yeah, that's really cool, man. I love like just the perspective you're sharing. And I kind of want to like switch gears and go into like, we're talking a lot about like, high level working on building the business and on the business. Let's talk about like some of the day-to-day stuff and like how you guys operate. One of my favorite things about Pine Printshop is that you guys use water-based ink. So let's talk about that a little bit, because when people ask us or they buy our t-shirts, they're like, dude, these shirts are insane. Who prints them? They literally, we get those emails at least once a week, dude, or Instagram messages. People lose their minds over it. And like, I buy a lot of t-shirts from friends that have BMX companies or whatever it is. And like, I love to support them. However, the shirt sticks to me because the ink is so heavy. So let's talk about why water-based ink.
Yeah. So, the industry standard in screen printing is it's plastisol. So it's basically liquid plastic that's printed onto a shirt. If you've ever had a shirt that, on a hot day, it sticks to you, it doesn't breathe well. Some of them are damn near bulletproof. Chances are it's probably a plastisol print. And so around 2015 or so, I think I watched a documentary or something and had like a bit of an existential crisis of like, the documentary was about the waste of the textile industry and the immense pollution and exploitation that comes from it. And I watched that, at the time it's like me and a buddy running this print shop. I'm like a little drop in the bucket. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm contributing to this monster, like the #2 polluting industry in the world. And for a while, again, like, I mean, dude, I've had several times where I'm just like, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And like, that was one of the first where I was just like, I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to be a part of this. Or I want like what I do to positively contribute to the world. And kind of came to a conclusion that I'm like, well, me not doing this isn't going to mean that people aren't going to print t-shirts. If I exit the game right here, like
somebody's going to fill that void.
Yeah, they'll just go print their shirts somewhere else. So like, is there a way as this, itty bitty little piece of this huge industry, is there a way that I can help move the needle in the right direction? And so, I'm not making the garments. I can choose what garments I push to customers, or we can choose like what we print on, but like, I don't make the garments. What's really within my control is like, how do we decorate them? And so it was about then that I started looking into water-based inks. Plastisol requires all these different chemicals to clean up, and water-based was like, it seemed like this less chemical intensive alternative, and the product was superior. So, one day I like took all my plastisol inks and took them to the, hazardous waste recycling center. And I'm like, I'm done. I'm a water-based printer now. And like just bought all these water-based. So I'm like, I got to figure this out. And like, I didn't really know at the time how different it was to print water-based inks. So, for the next gosh, I mean, like even to this day, man, we still run into stuff. They're way more technical to print. And over the next couple of years, just got deeper and deeper into the technicality of it, the craft of it, figuring out how to build inks properly, what fabrics do they work best on, what inks are best for this type of project, et cetera, et cetera. And, and going to industry events, going to, Will and I went out to an event in Chicago where, these water-based manufacturers are demoing their products, and we learned a ton there, talking to other people in the industry who are printing water-based to learn from them. And again, kind of like, it was kind of starting from scratch, because it's like, forget everything you know about screen printing. Now, water-based screen printing is a totally different level. And so, got humbled again and started from scratch, and got humble, asked people, and over the years, like we're still not perfect. We still screw up, obviously. We're not perfect, but like we're pretty dang competent at printing water-based now. And I love just the way that it feels on the shirt. So most plastisol inks have a substance called phthalates in it. I don't know if you guys are familiar with phthalates.
No, it doesn't sound good though.
It's bad, man. It's like the worst thing. It's also the hardest word to say, but there was this study that came out that phthalates, I mean, unfortunately, they're in like plastic products of all kinds, food packaging. I mean, we've all been exposed to phthalates at some time or another, but plastisol inks being one of them. And phthalates are causing huge infertility problems. Human taints over generations have been shrinking, and largely account due to phthalates,
Really?
Exposure to phthalates. So all of our inks are PVC and phthalate free, which is a point of pride for us. It's like my employees aren't exposed to that. The people who wear our shirts aren't exposed to that. And I think it's just a superior product to your industry standard plastisol printed t-shirt. So it's definitely been for us, there's a lot of people kind of see screen printers as a dime a dozen. The barriers to entry to my industry have been lower and lower and lower, where you can go on Craigslist, buy a screen print press for next to nothing. Totally. And like you can be printing t-shirts tomorrow. Or now the big thing is like the Crickets.
Oh, dude.
The little vinyl cutters. You get a Cricut and a heat press, all of a sudden, like, I can make t-shirts.
All of a sudden you're putting phthalates all over your shirts at home.
Yeah, exactly.
With the phthalates, was that like most eye-opening thing that you kind of came across? Because like for coffee, there's all these things, mountain biking, like every industry you dive into, I feel like there's so many things that are just misunderstood from people. Like what was that like eye-opening thing in the industry that you're in? You're just like, whoa, man, like I had no idea.
I think I was not aware until of phthalates or even what they were. Like all of our inks were labeled PVC and phthalate free, and I'm just like, cool. Like it must be bad if they're advertising that it's free.
Yeah.
But then there was a researcher on the Joe Rogan Experience last year that blew up phthalates and was like, this could be leading to the infertility crisis. And so I was like, oh wow, interesting. Well, now I know exactly what this thing is.
This all makes sense.
This all makes sense. So I think the biggest realization for me was just like a lot goes into a cotton t-shirt.
Yeah.
Hundreds of gallons of water and pesticides and chemicals and all these things. And there's a lot of people in our industry trying to figure out like how to make a better t-shirt, how to do it in a more responsible way. On the textile side, like how do we use less intensive materials, less resource intensive materials to create more eco-friendly t-shirts? And then again, like I'm at this point, I'm not the person making those decisions. What's within my control is like pushing people towards, hey, here's a slightly better alternative to your industry standard t-shirt. And what is within my control is like the consumables that I use. So with water-based, it was there's no chemicals required to clean it up. There's no solvents required to clean it up, which is also like less consumables that I have to pay for. And it seemed like for me, I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I want to do this in the best way possible. And water-based was like, still water-based printing is like, here I am talking about this weird subculture of screen printing again. It's just like 30-year-old me talking about Venomware headbands. Yeah. I'm like, not that much has changed.
Dude. I think it's so cool because like, I don't know, like for me, like I didn't know all of that stuff. I just know how comfortable the shirts are and how good the prints feel. So like I feel even better now knowing that it's like free of those harmful chemicals. Cause like, same thing. It's like you learning about those harmful chemicals. Like the older I get, the more I'm starting to learn how many harmful chemicals are in everything that we consume.
Everywhere.
And like, trying to limit your consumption of that stuff is pretty wise. And like, there's a lot of people having those conversations now. And it's just like, being aware of it, right? And like, so it's cool to hear that that's like, a pillar of your business too. Like, not necessarily, on purpose, but it happened. And like, now you're leaning into it and that's sick.
Totally.
And if it was like a product I saw once a month, twice a month, I'd be like, yeah, whatever. But like, I'm whipping these t-shirts on every day. So it's like actually quite intriguing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We're riding in them. It's humid out.
I'm sure that's when it gets into your blood, right? Like you're putting on one of those heavy t-shirts. It's probably seeping into your pores.
I don't know. But I know that like, I think most phthalate exposure is through food packaging, like where you're actually ingesting like
consuming it.
Yeah, into your body. But, for us, like in the printing process, whether it's plastisol or water-based, after something gets printed, it goes through a dryer and there's fumes that come off of that. And I'm like, so especially for the sake of my team, like I want to make sure that's as minimally toxic as possible, just as they're doing that for 10 hours a day.
That's so cool, man.
Yeah, production, even like coffee roasting, right? Like the smoke that comes off when we, roast it.
When you smoke the coffee.
Yeah, when we smoke it, when we roast it.
Well, there was in coffee, there was that big issue a few years ago that came to the surface. This is like 5 years ago, but flavored coffees, like the coffees that you see that are like, taste like Snickerdoodle.
Yeah, you guys make that stuff, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's our favorite thing to make. So, yeah, the flavorings that people, there's these companies that are like the gourmet coffees, right? That add flavor to the coffee. Nobody in the specialty coffee world really does that I'm aware of. But they were like adding it in, like basically like a concrete mixer. They'd add flavoring in there and then they'd bag it up and they'd sell it. Well, it came to the surface that those flavorings had like a bunch of gnarly cancer-causing chemicals. And sometimes they were putting it on the green coffee. And that's when it would be really bad, is these roasters were ending up with these crazy cancers. And they couldn't figure out what it was. And it was, the fragrance or whatever it was in these products. And like, but you just don't know until you know. And then usually it's too freaking late. And
there's got to be there are so many examples of that.
Yeah.
Through just like
every industry has it, right?
Every industry, like as humanity has gone through the Industrial Revolution, like, there's probably stuff today that we're consuming on a regular basis that there just hasn't been enough time. Like,
it's like the asbestos thing, right? Like,
right.
Yeah. Asbestos is so bad. But at one point, nobody knew. And like, what are we using today that is going to be the next generation's asbestos?
I think it's these.
Oh, yeah. The cell phone will certainly be the next asbestos.
I think like having those around your brain and by your genitals.
Yeah. I read a study about it not too long ago. Like I always put my phone under my leg when I'm driving.
Yeah.
And I read a study that can lead to infertility as well because like of the radio waves. So it's like, wow, dude, like, there's really no way to live a life where you're free of those kind of things.
No.
But you can limit exposure by
with the
aware.
Knowledge. Yeah. Yep. Once you have the knowledge, you can.
And I think it's those things you do every day, right? If you're putting that cell phone under your leg every day, if you're wearing those t-shirts or eating that, BPA products every day.
Sure.
So
I want to talk a little bit about Pine as a brand because I've always been fascinated by it because there are, like you said, screen printers are a dime a dozen for the most part. But I have never really encountered a screen printing brand that is a brand in itself. Yeah. And that's like something that I've always been drawn to with you guys. I'll never forget the first time that I walked into your place, how beautifully merchandised it was and like how open air and colorful and like inviting it was. Like what drove you to that? Like what inspired you to be that? Because I've never seen that before.
Yeah. Well, I always thought like, screen printing got its hooks into me as a young kid. And I've always been fascinated by it. For me, it was innately satisfying to take a design, like a concept, to something real. And screen printing was a great medium to do that. So I've always been like fascinated by the craft and like taken by screen printing. So that when I'm like, I want to share this with other people, because like to me, this is magical. And so especially in the first couple of years, like we were always at festivals and stuff doing on-site printing. And there's a lot of shops who do that now, but you know, a lot of people, maybe they're familiar with, a lot of people haven't seen screen printing in person. And so to come to like, to be at a music festival and come across this booth where they're making t-shirts on the spot, like it's cool.
Yeah.
And a lot of people aren't familiar with the process. So for me, man, I was always like, I think innately it's part of who I am. Like I've always been kind of an aesthetically driven person. So if I'm going to put my name on something, like it better look good. The brand better feel cool, or it's not me. Like, like I don't want to have anything to do with it. So that was part of it. And I wanted to share, like, I wanted to bring this craft that I was so taken with out of warehouses in the industrial park and like show people the magic of screen printing. So in like 2018, when we moved into the shop we're in now in Old Town Fort Collins, the thought was like, how can we elevate our own craft, show people exactly what it is we do, and in doing so, like educate people, and I think also elevate like the perceived value of what it is we do. Because, you know, a lot of people don't want to know how the sausage is made. But if it turns out the sausage is made in a really cool way,
Yep.
like, I love this sausage.
Totally. No, I think that's a great way to, you know, approach that though, because like not a lot of people do understand like what that process looks like.
Sure.
And, like, who really has seen like a shirt being printed? Like,
Right.
That's very rare.
I think so. Yeah, it was about like, how can we share this thing that we do with people? And you know, I've always wanted, like, I tell my employees like it's really important to me that Pine is a good place to work, because in order for me to ever have any kind of distance from it or flexibility, as far as like I can go to Europe for 2 weeks, I got to have other people who are bought into this thing and other people who enjoy being there. And so I think part of having a cool space that we're in and like making it aesthetically pleasing and making it, you know, having a ton of natural light and making it a place that people just enjoy being in is part of like making it a good place to work and making it something that other people like being a part of. That's really important to me. And like, I think, and like you said, you know, a lot of print shops, especially, you know, there's a couple archetypes in my industry. And there's, until, you know, in the last 10 years, the roof has kind of been blown off of the industry secrets and like, this is how you print a t-shirt. And like I said, the barriers to entry have been real low. But prior to that, it was like real tightly kept industry secrets. And there's still some printers like that who, you know, they have no, like I said, they're basically printing shirts in a warehouse in an industrial park somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, I think there's definitely a need for that. For myself, it was like, I think screen printing is so rad, and I think other people will too if they only knew.
Yep.
So let's take it out of the shadows, take it out of the warehouse. Let's make it visible, and like, let's try to share and educate people about what it is we do, because it's cool.
It is cool. And for anybody listening, like if you're ever passing through Fort Collins or if you're in Fort Collins, like, are you guys on 4th and Olive?
We're on, it's basically College and Olive.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So if you're ever passing through there, stop by and say what's
come
up
on
to
through.
these guys, because it is such a beautiful space, like the garage door and everything. I don't know. It's just every time I'm in there, I'm like in heaven, because I'm like I dream of the day that we have a space, hopefully one day, where we can invite people in like that.
Totally.
And it's like, I mean, I've seen it when people are just kind of like walking down the street when I'm in there talking to you guys, and people are like looking in the garage door, like, what the hell is happening in there? Like, I think that's so cool, because you can be inquisitive and like like you said, people that have never seen that before. They get to stand at the garage door and they get to see everybody in there hustling. It's like,
Yeah.
you can almost be like that like zoo feature where you're in there working, you like wave at people out the door and like
don't feed the
wave
printers.
them in. Yeah, dude, it's so cool. And like alongside of, you know, that piece of it, you also have had like some of your own like drops, which are super cool. And that's something I've never seen. And like, you know, you're an artist as well. So you get to like draw up a lot of that really cool stuff and like make that dream come true, which is so cool. Like not only are you producing it, but you're like, you know, creating it as well.
Yeah. And again, man, like that's kind of I have all this, now I have like all this rad equipment, like state of the art equipment to make shirts and print posters and embroidery and patches and all this cool stuff that I think one of the biggest, as businesses got more complicated and more of my time has been allocated to like fighting fires and managing the operations of a business, I have been able to do less and less of the stuff that like initially drew me into this, of like creating my own stuff and like having the satisfaction of seeing that creative process all the way through, from design to production to selling someone something that I made. Like that's really cool. But as the business has grown, like I do less and less of that. You know what I mean? I'm like troubleshooting automations and like working on the website and all this different stuff. But I still like, I think as I built out a team underneath me and a team to support me, like I'd love to get back to doing more of that kind of stuff. I think only again, like my path has not been like a straight line from A to B. You know, it's like a very winding path where I learned a lot of different things only through burning out, only through failing, only through some like real and like coming to places where I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore.
Totally.
It's like when you get to that place, it's like you kind of have to return to like, why did I start this in the first place? Or like, what was the thing? How did I get here? I'm trying to remember. How did I get here? And like coming back to those things and finding ways to, I don't know that I ever answered the question of like how I stay motivated now, but it's like finding ways to return to those things that initially had me so excited about the business. So for me, it's like learning new things. I'm like an innately curious person. So learning new things, whether that's like a new way to market or a new print method or and creating new things. So those are the things that still keep me engaged. I think like whether I'm doing this or I'm in another line of work, like those are just parts of me that are innately a part of me, that if I'm doing those things, I'm probably like the best version of myself. I'm probably happiest.
Yeah, you're like filling your cup up through doing that.
Exactly.
Well, let me ask you this. We've talked about it a little bit, so I'm not directly putting you on the spot. But you say, you know, you've kind of moved away from getting to do some of the fun design and stuff that you really like craved on the early days. Like, you know, we've talked about maybe a Traction Pine brand collaboration.
Yes.
Do you think that's something we can figure out before this episode drops?
Oh, dude, we should definitely drop that.
Yeah. All right, dude. Let's do it. I think a bag of coffee is pretty easy to do, but let's figure out a dope ass t-shirt.
I would love that.
And I've always been a massive fan of your art. So like, yeah, let's try and figure something out, man. I think that's going to be possible.
Or a new hat. I feel like
a hat could be sick too.
I feel like we need a new hat.
Let's do a capsule, dude. Like a full capsule.
How about a box set? Hat,
I feel like it's only appropriate that we maybe do some like clout goggles or some printed sunglasses as well.
Right?
Yeah.
Some Pine Traction sunglasses. I feel like it's only appropriate if you're watching this, you know what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think
if you're listening, we're all wearing sunglasses right now.
That's in order.
Thanks to Garrett.
Yeah. Hell yeah. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. I don't know. Your parents have been brought up a bunch, and there's been insanely influential people in my life and Mike's life that got me where I am. Like, who is the most influential person in your life? Is it your parents? Is it someone else, a girlfriend? Like, who is that for you?
Yeah, man. My parents have been hugely influential on me over the years, just like even in ways like I'm 50-50 Mark and Annie, right? Like their DNA is in me. So I'm like innately really connected to those people, and just the way that we were raised, they've been a huge influence on me. I have a cousin, the cousin who made the investment in me when I first started Pine. My cousin Josh and my cousin JC are also entrepreneurs who they're a couple of years ahead of me, and they've always been, you know, even from when I was a dumb 22-year-old who like wanted to start a t-shirt company, they're like, all right, dude. Yeah. Like, I believe in you.
Well, and they seem like, I mean, I don't want to interject and throw you off, but they almost seem like great leaders to me too, because they were able to see that fire burning in your soul, that they inherently knew that you were going to be successful even when you didn't, because they were, you know, they had that foresight, it seems like, which is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been, like I said, man, like my family has been my family is still just a huge part of my life, and like is a huge part of who I am. And like, so, you know, my cousins, my parents, and like now, you know, I've been married for the better part of a decade. So like my wife, Jane, is like, she'll laugh because as the business has been like, you know, it's been tumultuous, man. And like we were throughout our 20s, like there's been so many times when, you know, I'm so stoked. I'm so like high on whatever the last success was or whatever it may be. And Jane's seen me there, and she can be excited with me. And then she's also seen me when I'm like, I'm done.
Yeah,
I'm done. I'm hanging it up.
Console you and like bring you back.
Yeah, like, and she's just like, and she can, you know, she's can meet me at whatever point of the spectrum that I'm on in the moment. Like she can meet me there. And so like having a partner who has seen me both at my best and at my worst makes a huge difference to me. And so she's been an amazing, you know, she's like my partner in all things, is what I say.
That's so cool.
And she's just like, she's kind of my rock when I'm like, I love what I do. I hate what I do. I love what I do. I hate what I do.
It's so important to like, you know, or it's very cool. I shouldn't say it's so important, but it's very cool to be able to have somebody like that to lean on, because like it is very hard to go through that alone, where you're just like going through those ebbs and flows, and like, you know, when you're sitting there in your room by yourself and you're just like, damn, dude, everything sucks, or yeah, everything's great.
Yeah.
Like, it is good to have that person to celebrate with.
It's great to have a sounding board and someone to like bounce ideas off of.
Or to be brutally honest. Yeah, they can be brutally honest with you, right? So
for Jane, like, especially handling employee issues or whatever, I always joke that Jane's like our unofficial head of HR, because I'm like, okay, here's what happened. What should I do?
Yeah. She's like, pump the brakes. Here's what you need.
She's like, first of all, you need to sleep on this.
Yeah. What's so good is you guys, have gone through those ebbs and flows, and she's seen every little piece of it. So like, you're going to trust her wholeheartedly. Whereas if you asked us, like, obviously we can give you what we've went through, but it's not the same. So I think that's so good that you guys have been there since, you know, the past decade. That's priceless, really. You know what I mean? So
let me ask you this with Jane. I know she's a retired school teacher now, and she's, you know, she's working still in the education system in some capacity.
Sure.
Is there any future that you think that she would work for Pine, or do you want to keep that? Do you guys want to keep that line in the sand?
Oh man,
not work together directly.
We've talked about it at times, but like, you know, for so long, our goal has been to like build the business into something that doesn't demand so much of us or so much of me. And so when I think that she has a lot that she could bring to the business, but that kind of, it ties up more of us as a unit in that business. So that when we want to go to Europe for 2 weeks, it's even harder if both of us are integrally involved in the business. So that's kind of where we've drawn the line there. Not that she couldn't bring a lot to the business, and not that I think it would be fun. And again, like my parents have been business partners for 30 years and like are to this day, and have very complementary skill sets. And I think Jane and I like balance each other real way in ways like that. But for us, it's been like, how can we kind of like, we want more freedom. Like we want to decentralize from this business, not like
we want to have a life.
Yeah. We want to have a life outside of this. So we've kind of had to draw some boundaries there, and she's great at what she does.
That's cool.
It's cool. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask you the most important question of this podcast.
Oh yeah.
What do you think your wife's MySpace song was?
It's probably Alicia Keys or
Don't mess us
who's
up.
that? Who's the sister band that starts with?
It's like Kid Rock.
Oh man, she's
First Aid Kit.
She's gonna be so bummed when she
The
hears
sister
this.
band.
Hanson.
Oh,
Hanson.
Hanson.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
like a
Hmm.
Maybe Alicia Keys, Hanson. If if Jane launched a MySpace tomorrow and she could put a song on there, it'd probably be something Maggie Rogers.
Okay.
Oh,
For
yeah.
you, if you could start a MySpace page today,
Ooh.
what would your current MySpace
Good
song be?
question.
Oh,
That's
that's
one
a
we've never
really
asked
Yeah,
before.
good question.
Nice. Dude, I've got such an eclectic I was actually talking to Will about this the other day. It's like when you listen to music that's algorithmically like
It's like
served
delivered to you. Yeah.
it's like, man, I really like this song, but I don't necessarily listen to an album all the way through or even know who sings this song. I'm just
Sure.
like, that's a dope song. I'll
Well,
save that.
I will say, so me and my wife Cheyenne have been getting more into vinyl over the last couple of years. And it's been a really cool medium to get into, not because it's hip, but because you listen to an album front to back.
Yeah.
And you start to really appreciate music for what it is. And what that's made me do when I'm going to Spotify now is when an artist drops a new album, or when I stumble upon an artist that I've never heard or somebody I haven't heard in a while, I'll force myself to listen to that whole album and not allow myself to skip, because you only hear the hits when it's served to you.
Yeah, totally.
When you go back through and listen to albums front to back, you're like, holy shit, there's so much depth to what this is.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it is creative. And so when you're skipping through people's like masterpieces, you're missing a lot of like the depth to it, you know? So
And a lot of the time a song is like a part of a bigger piece of art, right?
yep, you're
Like
reading you're reading one chapter of the whole book.
Yeah, that's a great way to put
So-
it.
And I feel like you appreciate those artists that can put, album front to back. Like you get,
cohesive album.
you get that album and you're like, what in the world? Like it makes you appreciate the next song because the first song led into it
Right,
perfectly.
yeah.
Like the tempo changed. You're like, holy shit.
Yeah.
But also there are some artists where just one song is enough. Like, dude, I got
The
this-
one-hit wonders, right?
I got served this song the other day, and I'm like, I like this. It was on like a rock workout playlist, and I'm like, oh, this is nice. What is this? I open it up, and it's Machine Gun Kelly.
Oh,
I'm
no.
like, oh no.
Did you smash your phone? You're like, what is wrong
No,
with
I
me?
saved the song, bro, and added it to my own
But some
playlist.
of them hit like that, and then you like listen to the other artist's songs, and you're just like,
Yeah, then I went to
Make
listen to
more
the
like
album.
this.
I'm like, dude, maybe this album's okay. I went and listened to the album. I'm like, nah.
I think I probably know exactly what song you're talking about.
I'll keep to just the song.
All right. We got off in the weeds. You asked what his
Yeah, so
MySpace
what
would be.
the one
Oh
song?
man.
For those not watching YouTube, he got on his phone, hopped on Spotify, was about to get there, and then we got distracted. So what is that song?
It's hard, dude. That's a
hard one. Two of my top two albums of all time right now are Father of the Bride by Vampire Weekend and Circles by Mac Miller.
Okay.
Ooh, yeah.
Mac Miller, dude.
So that was the last album he made before he kicked the bucket.
yeah.
So maybe even just the title track from Circles.
Mhm.
I
Okay.
love that whole album,
That
and it's
album's,
hard to
like,
choose from
fantastic.
that. And I think that's one of the ones that all the way through is just.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go with Circles by Mac Miller.
Hell yeah. What about you, Sean?
I'm a sucker for a dude named Leif Volbeck. He's like an indie artist from Quebec. Pretty pretty
Sick.
chill. It's like kind of Gregory Alan Isaac-y.
Interesting.
I feel like it's either going to be super sad like that or Pentagram.
Yeah.
Like nothing in the middle.
I was just gonna say Pentagram Ghoul for me right now is just like
Yeah.
the one that just keeps coming on, and I'm just like, dude, this is so freaking good.
I feel like it'd be Last
So-
Days Here from Pentagram
Yeah.
or like some sad ass song from Leif Volbeck, depending on what mood I'm in.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I like
could see
it.
that.
I like it.
What about
I think we
you? Oh,
should
yeah.
launch MySpace pages.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Maybe we should put a Spotify playlist together for this collaboration as well.
Ooh.
What hold on. You know how we
I
do
need to
the
make notes here.
picture for when we launch this podcast? We put it on our story. We should put the Mac Miller song on top of his photo.
Ooh, that could be
So
sick.
each person has to put their song on when we launch the podcast.
That could be
I
super
like that.
fun.
New tradition.
Yeah.
I like it.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, I feel like something new and wonderful has been birthed here today, boys.
I love it. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, this is why I always enjoy conversations with you, because you just have such a good, like, contagious personality where I feel like a lot of fun ideas come out of it. So thank you for that.
Dude, thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to say, like, partnering with you guys and getting to know you guys on a personal level over the last couple of years has been so fun. Part of what makes my job fun is like is these kind of relationships of like, you know, a lot of the people that I work with are also in similar endeavors where they're starting their own business or running their own brand or you know, running their own band.
Yep.
And there's always a lot of fun common ground, and it's fun to talk shop and talk,
It's fun
you know,
to
share
grow
battle
together.
stories and grow
Yeah.
together. So thank you guys for just your partnership and all the, you know,
Hell yeah.
over the last couple of years, we've made some sick merch together. And
I don't know if we've ever said it to you, but I say it to people all the time when I introduce them to you or talk about our shirts. But I am dead set in the fact that we will never print a t-shirt anywhere else because
Truth.
you guys do such good work.
Thank
So,
you.
Truth.
yeah,
Thank you.
I want to jump back into talking about, you know, you and Jane working together. You said, you know, you're trying to like figure out how to grow kind of away from the business and figure out more time. Like, what is your end goal for the business?
Yeah, that's a great
Or
question.
do you have one right now?
I think it's kind of evolved over time, man. But for me, like, when I first started, the business was so tied up with my ego and with my identity of like, I am Pine. And I think over the years, like, I've been able to like separate myself a little bit more from the business of like, man, I'm so much more than just this dude who makes t-shirts, right? And like, I don't want to get those things twisted. But what's really, as it's grown beyond me, like, I think one of the things that is most important to me about Pine is like, how does it always comes back to people. So like, what is this business to the people who work at it? I really want to make a great place for people to work. And I tell my employees, like, the best thing that Pine could ever be, or your time at Pine could ever be, is like part of the story of how you live the life you want to live. Like, I have no fantasies about work being, for most people, like, a job is a means to an end.
Yep.
Like, a job serves the rest of their life. And so I have no fantasies about, like, no one is ever going to care about my business to the degree that I do. But all that said, like, I've built over a number of years, like, I've built this platform and this financial vehicle basically that can like benefit both Jane and I and other people. So the best thing that it could ever be is something that does exactly that, of like, that benefits people beyond myself. So starting with my team and my employees, but then extending to people like you guys, like providing value to customers and like building long-term good relationships with the people who support me, you know what I mean? Who pay my bills. So I like my vision is for Pine to be like a net benefit to everyone who encounters it, whether it's internally as an employee or externally as a customer. I just want it to be something that leaves people it leaves people in a better place than, so like we solve problems for people and I provide a good living for my employees. Like at the end of the day, I can't take myself too seriously because like, dude, I make branded merch. Like it's not that big of a deal.
Lives.
I'm not saving lives. And like at times I've been like, man, like in really bad days, I'm like, I'm so glad the consequences for a bad day at work for me are like so low.
Yeah.
So, but all that said is like, there is something to, I think, if you can stay humble and not take yourself too seriously or get your ego too wrapped up in this thing, like business has immense power to, I saw it with my parents. It's like business has immense power to be like a good thing for a community or a good thing for the people involved with it. So for myself at this point, it's like, I want us to be really good at what we do, and I want it to be good for the people involved at all levels.
I love that, man. That's beautiful. And it like literally I'm getting chills just like hearing that. Like the net benefit thing is so freaking cool. It's collaborative, it's community driven, and it is like about what you always like talk about. So that's freaking dope. So
thanks
for sharing that with us, dude.
Before we wrap up on Pine, we've been working together for what, 3 or 4 years now?
Going on 4, which is crazy to think about.
To put you on the spot, what is your favorite traction garment you've printed?
Dude, honestly, the most recent ones, the Shadow collab,
Oof.
the back of those t-shirts is like some of the sickest art we've printed this year. That Raven art, dude, I don't know who did that, but
Arnaud.
holler at
works,
me.
He's so he works for Shadow. and he's in France actually. He's a French designer.
Really?
But he works for Shadow. But I can connect you guys because he's sick, dude. He crushes it.
Oh man, I love that. I love the backs of those tees. I thought those turned out so
We'll get
cool.
you plugged in with them because I don't know if you ever need somebody to do stuff like that or whatever.
Yeah.
But like he's sick. And also, I also want to introduce you to the homies over at Bayside because you talked about them earlier. So,
Do you know Bayside?
Yeah, dude. They have a coffee company.
Really?
Yeah, the drummer and the bassist, Nick and Chris, dude. Yeah.
That's so fun. Wow, dude, I would have been free. 8th grade me is freaking out.
Yeah,
right
dude,
now.
that's what I said the first time I was walking through it's called SCA. It's like the big coffee convention. I was walking through there with Chris and Nick from Bayside, Tim from Under Oath, and then the singer from Newfound Glory.
Dude.
And it was just like me, and I was just like, dude, this is like middle school, early high school me is crying right now. So
I still listen to, like, when I run, I still listen to Under Oath.
yeah. Oh yeah.
They're only
they
chasing
have a coffee company
safety.
too.
Do they?
Yeah, dude. Yeah, it's
Wow.
sick. It's called King State. They're down in Tampa, Florida. So
No
yeah,
kidding.
we're talking about doing
Shout
restaurant
out to
roaster.
Under Oath.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, the guitarist from Under Oath, Tim, has a coffee company.
That's
so
so funny.
we're talking about doing like restaurant roaster collabs with them. So when we do that, we know who we're coming to for some t-shirts.
Love that.
Yeah, as we like get into kind of wrapping this up, like this has been really incredible. We're an hour and 45 minutes in, which is crazy, you know, like I love when things go this smooth and it's just so much fun.
What's the average length of the podcast?
Like an hour and a half or so.
Nice.
So
You're
Right on
you're
point.
above average.
yeah, you're above average. You're exceeding
I'm gonna-
expectations right now.
I can't wait to tell Jane.
She's gonna be so excited.
above
for you.
average.
She's gonna give you a nice pat on the back. This is kind of an off the wall question for you. It's one we haven't asked before again, so we're setting another tradition. But what's a question you wish we would have asked? This is a hard one.
That is a hard one.
It's about your love life, huh?
A question I would have asked. I don't know, man. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Sweet,
I don't know that we left any stones unturned.
I wish we would have recorded before we started the podcast.
Yeah, we were talking about some good stuff.
Some
there for a
deep
minute.
stuff.
Yeah. Moving on.
Talking about
Oh,
like
go ahead.
we were talking about ego. Was there a lot more ego when you started the business and now? It's second question. If you could go back to the beginning of Pine, what advice would you give yourself at the beginning of starting it?
I think, yeah, there was definitely more ego involved then. And I think just as I've got older and matured as a human being, like even figuring out what my ego is and unpacking a lot of that, and again trying to separate my identity from this thing, because
Yeah.
I think there's a big temptation. I think a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs get those things, get like personal value mixed up with business success, and it's easy, man. Like I think that we live in this culture that I haven't always said. In the last couple of years, I kind of had this realization of like anybody with any kind of ambition needs to be able to answer the question, what's enough, for themselves.
Yeah.
And because we live in this culture that if you haven't honestly thought about that and unpacked that for yourself, we live in a culture that will tell you whatever you have or whatever you are is never enough.
Yep.
And it's like, it's especially in the context of owning your own business, like it's real. There's always going to be someone in your industry who's like ahead of you, right? There's always going to be someone who's doing better than you. And I think it's real easy to get caught up in this rabbit wheel of like always going for the next thing and equating your worth or who you are with this thing that you built. Because like we put so much blood, sweat, and tears into these businesses and brands and stuff. And I think that's all well and fine. But, you know, my realization in 2020 when shit hit the fan was like, this is all really fragile. And like, this thing that I've made, it could be gone like that.
Yep.
And that's okay. Like, it doesn't mean that it's not, it doesn't mean that it's not of value. And it doesn't mean that like all that hard work is for nothing. But like, I think you also just have to see it for what it is. And it's like, if Pine ever ceased existing, like I would still exist. And like
that's such a good way to look at that too. Yeah.
And so I think it's really important for people who, I mean, dude, I've had such a one-track mind for the last, the better part of my 20s of like building this thing. And I have the type of mind that like, even if I'm not at the shop, like I'm thinking about stuff, and it's like, it's really hard to turn that off. And I think when you invest that much of yourself in something, it's really easy for those lines to become blurred. And so, yeah, I think when I kind of realized that was in 2020 when, everything kind of came to a grinding halt. And it's funny, like in early March 2020, my parents, we had heard like inklings of the coronavirus, and I'm like, we'll see what happens, And my parents called me and they're like, listen, this could get weird. They're like, your employees have unemployment. They're like, you need to stay focused on like keeping the ship afloat. Don't feel like you need to keep people on if it's at the expense of the business. And I literally was like, well, I hope it doesn't come to that.
Yeah.
I'm like,
it never would, right?
Yeah. Dude, in the next like 3 days, we had like $30,000 of orders canceled. Wow. And I'm like, okay, something's happening. So it's like that realization of, oh man, this thing that I've worked so hard on and invested so much of my time and energy and myself in, like at the end of the day, it is so fragile. And there's so many things outside of my control that could like bring this to an end. And that's kind of what put it into perspective for me. And so for myself, it was like, well, as much as I love this thing and as much as proud as I am of it, like I have to see it for what it is. And that's something other than me. It's something that I made. It's something that I do. It's something that I enjoy, but like, it's not me. Does that make sense?
It's the hardest thing. Like when I started racing, you probably had the same thing. Like I had to qualify for that World Cup or my life was over. Like
Right.
It's who I was, how I validated myself. And when we started traction, it was like this ease of my mind that I was just like, all right, yeah, if I get 22nd at this World Cup, my life isn't over. I still have this other thing. And turned into a blessing in the beginning. And then it was like this, kind of curse at the end because it was like this something is like plan B. So it's like now I'm so fortunate for it, but it made me care less about the sport. But it's funny, like I'm so much happier as a person not having my validation and my whole livelihood wrapped up into one thing. And it was so artificial at the time, but
Right.
sometimes you need that to like push yourself to that level. In that beginning when you started Pine, it needed to be your whole being to work there 60, 80 hours a week and,
Totally.
work 2 jobs. And it's just this like fine line. I think we all walk.
It's like an ebb and a flow of like, it has to be a part of you. And then you have to figure out how to disassociate at some point because it will consume you in a really negative way, or it can,
It can, man. And I think that it comes back to like what we were talking about earlier with like learning how to fail.
Yeah.
And like learning how to fail. Failure is inevitable at some scale. So like learning how to fail well. Yeah. And I think part of that is like not necessarily associating failure in business with like, I'm a failure as a human being.
Sure.
It's like, it's just, that's the curriculum. Like that's just something
so
else
hard
for me to learn from.
It's so hard to teach that to people or like even to yourself because it's like you're putting all this time in and you're like, I'm doing all the right things. And then it fails. You're like, you feel, as a failure, like, all right, I'm training. I'm doing all the right things and I got 30th. Like, what am I doing?
The only way you can learn that is by failing.
Exactly.
You can't tell somebody like, this is how it's going to feel. They have to experience that for themselves. Like there's some things in life where you can give people advice and they can be like, oh yeah, I understand that. But like what we're talking about right now, like you almost have, like it's different person by person. Yeah. So you have to experience that for yourself and figure out how you're going to respond to it, whether it is business or as a professional athlete or in a relationship or whatever it is. Like you have to experience that for yourself.
It's just part of the human experience.
Yep.
I had a friend who I've been trying to, he works at another print shop in Fort Collins and I've been trying to like recruit him for years. And he decided he wanted to strike out and start his own thing. And I was like, dude, let me take you out to lunch. Like, let's talk about this. And, I kind of told him all my horror stories and I'm like, dude, I don't like, you don't know what you're trying to do. Like from where you stand, you have no idea what you're undertaking.
Yep.
And told him all the horror stories and tried to impart, like, I guess there was some selfish, motivation, because I'm like, just come work for me.
Yeah.
But all that said, like, kind of left that conversation like, yeah, like he's gonna do what he's gonna do. Me learning that, I can't teach him that. Like, me telling him about those things is not going to necessarily teach him. You have to do it yourself.
Yep.
And that's okay, man. Like, I think that's, it's part of the human experience. It's necessary.
Yeah, it is necessary to like go down those paths and learn like right from wrong or like up from down, right?
Yeah.
Like, like I said, there are certain words that will resonate with you and some that will not. And like sometimes you just have to hit the ground and figure out like, oh shit, I can't do that
Right.
way. I thought I could, but I was seriously wrong.
And I think to like, if someone had come to me, if I could go back in time. So your other question was like, if I could go back and tell myself or give myself a piece of advice, like if 30-year-old me went back and talked to 22-year-old me, like, I don't know that 22-year-old me would be able to listen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I was
or even perceive that knowledge, right? Because like that's a hard thing to do when you're that young. Like I think about advice people have given me, that were much older than me. And I think about that advice now and I'm like, damn, if I would have listened to that when I was 22,
yeah,
I would be leaps and bounds ahead. Like, oh yeah, save your money and invest it. I'm like, dude, fuck that. I'm going to go out to dinner with my girlfriend every night.
You see these J's?
Yeah, do you see it? Yeah. Dude, just being dumb,
Yeah.
But like you can't perceive the knowledge that you're not willing to accept. You know?
And I think that would probably be my piece of advice is like, be more humble. Like you don't know shit.
Yep.
And I think I started with a mentality, maybe it was to my benefit at the time, but it certainly led to a lot of mistakes that I made along the way of thinking like, I knew best, or like, I'm going to just figure it out. Like there was a certain level of arrogance that I had of like, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to blaze my own path. And it's like, only through getting beat down over years, it's like, dude, like be a little more humble.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like ask for advice and, don't take yourself so seriously, and have a little more humility. 'Cause like, you don't know shit.
Yeah, the more you know, the less you know.
Exactly.
You know, right?
Well, just like have fun with it, right? Like
Yeah.
when you are being so serious about those things, like you lose a lot of like the beauty of why you do what you do, why
Totally.
you've created the business that you've created. Like you get so like close to it, that you forget why you're there. So
Yeah.
Talking about being humble, is there anyone you'd like to give a shout out to? We've talked about your whole journey. Who was that person?
Man,
or people.
I think it's all, I'm always humbled by like the people who like took a bet on me along the way. And so like, especially the people who came and worked for me, like working for a small business is like a whole different thing, man. Like I'm always super humbled and super grateful to all the people who have like lended me their time and energy to make Pine a better place. Like it's really incredible. And if I think about it too much, I get emotional, it's like, it's pretty insane to me that anyone would take a bet on me and take a bet on Pine. Like that's always been super humbling and like really, I guess humbling to me. So I'm super grateful for everyone over the years who's come and worked at Pine. Especially like the team we have in place now, and Will, who just left, has been such a huge part of our success. Like it's definitely, his last day was Wednesday, and it's definitely like it feels like an end to a chapter. We were kind of a dynamic duo for a number of years, and he's been such an integral part of, and such a huge part of our growth over the last couple of years. So definitely give a shout out to Will, shout out to the whole team at Pine, and like everyone over the years who's helped bring this thing into reality. Like it's super humbling to have other people say, yeah, I believe, let's go.
Yeah.
Heck
That's
yeah,
sick.
man. Well, before we fully wrap this thing up, do you have any like parting words for anybody listening who wants to start a business or just anything in general, parting words that you want to leave people with?
Oh man, I think starting a business is great. And like I said, I have huge respect for everyone everywhere trying to do anything. Cause like it's hard. Whether you're trying to start a business or start a band or make art, whatever it is, man, I think that I would there's a certain risk in like manifestation. When you go from fantasy to reality, like there's risk there. And I would just encourage people to like not don't be satisfied with the fantasy of something. Even though the reality is probably different than what it is, like man, there's so much growth in like manifesting stuff and bringing things to reality. And like I would encourage people, if you're trying to start a business, like be humble. But also like be bold. And I think at the end of the day, life is short and it's worth taking risks. And if nothing else, to again, like not get your success or failure in business equated with your own value, but look at it as like a curriculum. This is a way for me to grow and develop as a person. This is a way for me to learn about myself, learn about the world, learn about other people. And I think when you can have that humility and kind of that perspective of holding this thing loosely, holding it at arm's length and not like, again, not getting your ego too wrapped up in it, like that's a recipe for success. So if you win, you win. And if you lose, at least you learn something. So that's it, man. I'm still learning as I go. Like the more you see, the less you know. I am what I am today because of like I've tried a bunch of stuff that didn't work, tried some stuff that worked, and like I've just learned over the years that I think humility and holding things loosely is the way to go.
Hell yeah, man. I love the words. I love this whole conversation. I love that you're here. You're a freaking awesome human. I can't thank you enough for being here. If you're listening to this, if you're still here, and you ever need t-shirts done, hit this guy up, hit up Pine. They do incredible work. And like I said earlier, we'll never use anybody else. And I just want to thank everybody for listening. If you're enjoying these episodes on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And if you're listening to them on Spotify, Apple, or Amazon, please leave us a review. It really helps us and allows us to keep this project rolling forward. And as always, thank you for being a part of the Traction family. We'll catch you on the next one, and keep being scared of normal.